Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks, a special Goleta edition today. It's my pleasure to be with Rich Foster, who is very well known around Goleta, a longtime community activist who is running for Goleta Mayor. So I'm so excited to be here talking to him about his issues, everything going on in Goleta, and just give everybody an opportunity who doesn't know him to meet Rich and learn about his candidacy. Welcome to the show, Rich. How are you doing today?
Thanks a lot, Josh. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Great to have the opportunity. It's election year. It's great to have people focusing on the issues throughout the year, but especially in election season. So great to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Like I said, I'm so looking forward to this conversation. You are a Goleta guy. You're Mr. Goleta. Anyone who pays attention to this stuff has seen you at meetings for years, and you really have passionate views. And now you're stepping into the public eye and trying to make a difference officially, formally on the council. So talk to me. What's making you run, Rich? Why are you taking this step?
Well, yeah, I've gone down to city council meetings, school board meetings over the years, and spoken up on a number of issues. And in the past, different council members have said, "Well, why don't you run?" And I used to say, "Well, you do a lot of things that I'm not that interested in at this point." But as we move forward, especially over the last year or so, I've been looking at their capital improvement project deficit of money that they don't have funded. I look at our roads. There was two reasons we became a city, largely, is that people were very upset with the condition of our roads from the county. And they also felt that the county was becoming a dumping ground for housing, which we'll get to later. Unfortunately, the housing mandate has put some tremendous pressure on. I had some issues with how they went about selecting sites. And our roads are really terrible right now. They say they're spending 7 million this year, but just to stay at a mediocre level where we are, they'd have to spend 7.7 million. 5 years ago, we spent nothing on roads, and so that's principally we come down to money, and that's why I'm running because Luke Rio, our city finance officer, has said we have a structurally solid, strong city. Well, that's if you just look at the budget, but his agenda item also noted it didn't include the crib wall on Outer Cathedral Oaks, which is 20 million or more. It didn't include the fact we're behind 65 million or more on roads. It didn't include that on the next 5 year CIP projects were underfunded by 140 million. And these need to be addressed. And for a year now, I've been saying, how are you going to address? And now they've come up with the idea of a joint powers agreement, vertical agreement to help fund these, which is, in my view, is just a way of passing the debt for them off to the future. But so that's what got me into the ring. Goleta is a great city. Many great things have been done. But on the other hand, you can have a wish list of things you would like to have, which would be nice if we had everything paid for. I'm afraid that right now we have a number of things that we can't afford, and we need to learn where to drop some grants and stuff.
Yeah, so you're a numbers guy or budget guy. You go to these meetings and you know it as well as the planners or of course the electeds as well.
Well,
Look,
maybe.
you're able to ask really tough questions because you do your research. Let's talk about Old Town Goleta, which is obviously you're running for mayor, so everything in the city is your district. We've seen this Old Town restriping project plan. If you're on next door, people act like it's the end of the world, right? Like there's a lot of opposition to it. If you watch some of the social media from some of the elected officials on the Goleta Council, it's less of a problem. There seems to be, in my general interactions with people, just as a Goleta resident, a lot of people complain about it. They say that it creates more traffic and they aren't able to move the same way. And it's just like bad timing with all the roundabouts that are being created on the other end. There's a lot of buzz on this issue. And so people are talking about it. What's your view on the Old Town restriping?
Yeah, next door has been lit up with conversations about this. 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, Rosemary Gaglione, our former public works director, they said, we looked at this and this diagonal parking was a bad idea. Um, and the whole thing gained life and kept going forward for a long time. And then the bids came in at like 5.2 million, I believe, but it included a bunch of work they eventually dropped. And so they dropped it and slid it over onto it being part of Project Connect. It was two separate projects. And they paid for it by taking $2 million of the Project Connect money and sliding it to cover it. So we have a nicely repaved street. People are always going to have trouble with change, the back end diagonal parking. So looking at, first of all, one thing consideration we've been talking about lately is if you stop to back into a slot, you have a far greater chance of stopping traffic or slowing down traffic than if you just pull straight in. When you go to back out, you will have to wait until there's a break in traffic. So I think in terms of flow overall, probably had it been diagonal where you pulled in a normal way, it would have been less disruptive. One of the bigger problems, and I've talked to almost all the business people down there, is towards the eastern end of town, the way that it's been striped, there's 34 businesses that have parking lots that you can't turn into. You can't turn left into them, and you're not supposed to turn left out of them. If you turn to the west and go, you get down to the next street, it's no U-turn. The next street's no U-turn. So you're forcing traffic to go the direction opposite they want, turn into the neighborhood and turn around. I've proposed a simple fix to that, which is return the center lane roughly from, say, past a fuel depot out to the community center back into a regular left turn lane with yellow stripes with dash lines where Goleta Motors, when a truck comes to deliver, has a place they can park in the middle of the street and unload. If you're going to one of the businesses there, you can pull in, turn left. When you go to leave, you can pull out and wait for traffic break and pull out. I think in terms of, we heard from a number of business people at the city council a few weeks ago that they were hurting, that their sales were well down. I think the impact has been greater at that end of town, partially because of this, partially because it's closer to the road work. But I think that's one thing the city can look at on the October 1st meeting to fix it. I believe that in one sense, it's called the interim striping project, and that went away for a while. Now they've resurrected that. Had they just instituted 90-minute parking on both sides of the street without doing anything, they probably would have found that they have a lot more parking on the street. Businesses, people. One woman, Mary's Beauty Salon, said this van's been in front of my business for a month. So that what we gained there might have been obtainable for a much simpler thing. Bikes certainly feel safer. Our bike coalition is an incredibly powerful lobby. It's probably why we're building a $50 million bike path. But they're on Eckwell, Fowler. Eckwell is about 2 blocks south, and it's going to connect Fairview to Kellogg, and it's going to have a class one bike path. It would have been a very viable way for fast, safe bike passage through Goleta. But the project, they're not going to change what they're doing for 6 months at least. But I think in the short term, we can help the businesses by making it easier to get in and out of those businesses. And also by encouraging people, go down there and shop. It's not traffic jammed all the day, all day. I've been down there, had some great meals, and I encourage people to go down there.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of not being able to turn into parking lots because, on the macro level, right, if we're being positive and wanting to see the best intentions, it doesn't seem like the end of the world. Like it seems like a good thing. Let's make it safer for bikes. Let's streamline the traffic congestions that's there, and let's figure out more parking. Like great idea. But there's these little things like operationally that have changed. For example, I'll go to the Yummy Thai place over there, you can turn left to get into their parking lot, but when you're coming out, you can't turn left, right? You can only go right. And so that's an impact. And then so like before, if you did try to turn left, you might be waiting a while and it could be kind of like a tough thing, but you could. And then also, if you're turning right onto Hollister, turning into one lane as opposed to two lanes is more difficult because if you have two lanes, then the people who are going a little faster and straighter, they can go in that middle lane. Now it's just one lane, and so you're at the mercy of anyone letting you to turn right to go like up Hollister, and it's like harder to do, and it takes longer, and everything is backed up, and everything is slow, and not being able to make left turns on the Hollister from people who live in those houses and apartments over there behind 7-Eleven and those areas. Those are like real things that people who live there have to experience daily. So it seems as though even if they stick with this plan, that there should be some changes to it to allow people to be able to use it. And the diagonal back end parking, I mean, it just feels like a lot of people are avoiding Old Town now. It feels like there's like, I don't want to deal with that. And that's where the businesses are saying, people aren't complaining. When I go down there, and I know it's anecdotally, but it seems like whenever I go down there, a lot of those diagonal spaces are open. Whereas before you could not find a parking space on Hollister.
So part of that, I think, is playing whack-a-mole with parking. That before people would from the neighborhoods would park on Hollister because there was no restriction and they'd be there. So you'd go down there, you go, wow, this is a booming place.
Yeah.
To some degree, you go down there midday and there's quite a bit of parking. If you go there at night now, it fills up with residents who park there overnight and then move their car in the morning. Um, that I think there's things they could have addressed that would have been more important. For example, a week or so ago, they had a meeting about parking around Aramitos Park. There's 20 spaces at Johnny Wallace. They took two of those away for the city vehicles, and you have three high density housing projects. There's really very little parking there. It's sort of an example of putting too much in too small an area. But in January, they're going to start enforcing the regulations that you can't park within 20 feet of a crosswalk or a curb return. And in the eastern end of Old Town, in the residential area, just driving around quickly, I counted about 37 places where they're going to lose parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And on Hollister itself, if you go through there, there's corners which are currently yellow for unloading trucks, and they're going to lose those spaces. So unless trucks are going to park illegally, that we might have been better to be pursuing. They did this up on Carson. They found some parking spaces up on the Yardy property, but we might have been better off to take a couple $1 million and buy a home or two along the railroad tracks and level them and turn them into community parking down there for residents, as opposed to the business, and made it 90-minute parking on Hollister. It's easy to back engineer something, but there's still in the future there's going to be more parking issues in Old Town, especially if they build 300 units at the Yardy property there on Fairview, and another 79 over on Kellogg Avenue along Eckwell Avenue. We haven't beaten this yet. One of the biggest problems was, of course, the Caltrans is doing the bridges over the creek at the same time, both on the freeway and on Hollister. So people get backed up on. I go in from out by DP. Many days the freeway is backed up to Los Caneros or farther, so people get off and they try Hollister, and because the construction work is parked up there, so we get a feeling. Long term, I have some questions about the traffic circles. The Bicycle Coalition love the bike lanes, but they call the traffic circles meat grinders. And if you were heading east, going under 217, there's a lot of traffic that gets onto the freeway right there at the freeway ramp. Well, if they're in the traffic circle, they're going to have the right of way, slowing down the traffic going west on Hollister, coming from Patterson Avenue, and that's two lanes squeezing down to one. I think when we get this all done, we might find that we have still have a choke point created by these traffic circles.
Yeah.
That said, other ones work great. Los Caneros traffic circle was good, but Old Town merchants are definitely hurting. I was in a meeting with some of them the other day, and so the city needs to respond to those needs somehow or other than saying, well, let's see what we're going to have in 6 months' time. And there's not a one-all fix. Maybe someday we'll say, let's restripe it and go to diagonal pole straight in parking, keep it one lane each way. One thing I'll say for public safety, the yellow flashing light at Orange Avenue, the drivers do not see it in the late afternoon. I've been crossing there and been halfway across when all of a sudden people rocketed right on through.
Mm-hmm.
So please be alert. Don't be looking at one's cell phone crossing the street, which I've seen too.
Yeah, those are always tough, either crossing them or driving through them. And I've done both. And when you're crossing, you're basically, please, I'm here. You would like let everyone
And
know. And then when you're driving, sometimes you're like, oh wow, there's the light. Someone's crossing. It's a tough thing depending on the time of the day. So
I did have one thing on safety. For a long time, the hue and cry has been that Old Town's a horribly dangerous place for bikes and pedestrians, and you can't cross the street safely. Where they have 5 stoplights, they have 2 fully signaled crosswalks. Kim Lee Horn did a study for the city. It was put out in 2023, and at the time, Old Town did not have one of them. any one of the top 10 bad intersections or top 10 bad road segments. To some degree, the whole Project Connect, not the Project Connect, but the restriping project is based upon a myth. A lot of the time they were looking at numbers from 2003 to 2013. Nectarine Avenue did have problems. It's a line of sight problem, but and there have been accidents, but there was a sort of a myth of just how horrible it's been. And in terms of safety, Kyriel on the other side of the freeway is actually a more dangerous road segment.
Yeah. What would you do, Rich, if you were able to like fix things there in Old Town with the restriping? Would you just put it back to the way it was, or would you keep certain things? What is the answer here from your perspective?
Well, just putting it back seems to beg the question, A, because it hasn't been long enough. And we're still talking, the resurfacing, I think, was 1 million, the painting was 1 million, something like that. I'd be reluctant to spend $1 million quickly and unnecessarily. I would definitely right now, I would love to see the city go out there next week and restripe the center lane up at the other end of town for a place for trucks. Very, very low cost. And that way, in 6 months' time, these businesses can say, well, yeah, I bounced back, or they can say, no, I'm still hurting. I do think eventually it would be better to go ahead and restripe those diagonal slots the other direction. The majority of people are comfortable with that. Um, I, some of our council members have said they'd like to see Old Town sort of like an outdoor mall. We have three major thoroughfares in Goleta. It's going to remain a thoroughfare. So safety is a thing, but we also have to plan for the volume through there. And so if you can speed traffic up by having them pull straight in, I think that'd be a choice. And those two things are very simple striping. And we save the bike lanes for the bicyclists and for safety. In an ideal world, they would have done Eckwell Avenue first and had a full bike lane there, so you wouldn't have the bikes being squeezed through there during construction.
Yeah. So, Rich, let's pivot a little bit and talk about housing. There's been so much discussion about housing because of the Santa Barbara County housing element and the state demands. And we just finished the process, at least for now, regarding where to put housing. And a lot of it was on the edges of Goleta. We know about the big Glen Annie project. We know about rezoning of ag land on the other end of town. There's Kenwood Village. There is a lot of housing that is going to impact the city of Goleta, even if it's not
Absolutely.
actually in the city of Goleta. And so let's talk about that. I know this is one of your issues. What's going on from your perspective? What are we doing right with housing? What are we doing with what wrong about it? And what would you do differently if you were elected?
Well, the housing element sort of become the gorilla in the room, which took a lot of people by surprise. I would like to say, that if you look at the census figures and development from 2000 until 2020, Goleta is one of the few jurisdictions that actually built enough housing for their population growth. That said, the problem is we're not building economically affordable housing. The state defines affordable as 30 units per acre or more, but it really actually doesn't have anything to do with dollar value of rents and stuff. And I will be the first to say there's no easy answer to this. We live in a highly desirable place. Uh, I think during the housing element, we had some mistakes. For a long time, it had been tell the state we're going to rezone a little land here, we'll do something here, and they weren't too picky. This time around, at the 11th hour, they're going, no, we want to know positive places you can do this. And so, in a rush to get it done, the city pretty much just went to people with large hunks of land and said, are you interested in rezoning? And I was saying this last summer at the meetings. I wish they had gone to some places like, say, churches. We have a number of churches in town that have extra land that they're not using, and church population has grown older. And another places explored places where we could put 30 units on a parcel instead of 200 parcel on a unit, spread the impact out across town. Those weren't really pursued. The state is now talking about working with churches to expedite building on surplus land, and in the future that could serve us well. Uh, Also, this to some degree, everything got dumped in Western Goleta. With the Kenwood villages got knocked down to 190. I think Mr. Alker's asking for about 220 on his current proposal with bonus density. On the other side of the freeway, we have, I think it's 300 by, I've been a while since I've looked at these numbers. right by Albertson, another 135 out at Elwood Station Road, and not to mention the Glenanny monster of 800 to 1,000 homes. All those people are going to be using the Glenanny historic 101 interchange, which right now is 50 to 300% worse than any other interchange in Goleta area. So that in terms of housing, they had we we have to figure out a way where we're producing housing that actually helps people get into it. One of the proposals I had, which I was suggesting to the Sheriff's Association, is the city has, I think, it's $60 million in investment funds
Mhm.
that we could take some of that money, give up a little bit of our return, and use it as a short-term 5-year down payment for people who can make a mortgage, but you can't pay rent and save money for a down to help our local firefighters or police that we want to living in our community get into a house. After 5 years, they refi and they pay it back. The state's starting to pursue something like that I saw recently. One thing I've suggested, and then I was in a meeting the other day with the city and sort of tossed this out with Luke Rio and the other staff members, is that uh, if we the idea of ADUs and bonus density, where a developer can go up to maybe 50% over and above what he's zoned for, if 20% is affordable or very affordable. The idea of that was to increase our supply of economically affordable housing. I think it'd be worth looking at a concept of putting rent control on those for a certain period of time. Um, I oppose rent control in general. I think it degrades housing markets. I think it guarantees everybody gets a rent increase every year. But if I'm looking to put, $60,000, $70,000 into an ADU in my backyard, I can look and say, well, it's going to be rent capped for a while, and it's going to take me 6 years to get my money back instead of 3 years. I might build it, I might not. But if I'm just building and increasing housing without doing anything to increase the affordability, um, we're losing because every time we build a new house, actually, none of them provide the property tax it takes to provide the fire and police services. So uh, same thing with bonus density. A developer could look at it and say, well, I could go up to so many more units. What's it going to cost me to do this? If I have to take rent control on some of these units for 5 years or 10 years and it still pencils out, I'll do it. Or maybe I'll do half of that. But it's one way where it's increasing the amount on the very low side of opportunity. I think businesses have to step up to the plate. People working in your donut shops are not commuting to Santa Barbara to work, and or the more entry level jobs as a general thing. It's people working at the large engineering firms, the computer firms, the tech industry, who are making a good wage, but they prefer to live in Santa Maria because you get more house. I think these companies need to do more in terms of either down payment loans out of their own welfare, out of their own budgets to attract people. Just giving people higher pay is not necessarily going to do it. But the idea would be if you want to buy here, then we will help you with the down payment to get in. And I know that I was talking to Kristen Miller from the chamber, and she was talking about a plan that some people, I'm not actually sure who's behind it, putting forward to get businesses to invest in real estate property. I'm not sure that's the answer. We don't want to go back to the company town, but it's going to be a continuing problem. We are never going to build our way out of it. If building was the answer, New York City would have the lowest rentals in the country. Orange County would. And that, I mean, it's probably not popular to say not everybody can live here who wants to live here. And there
Yeah.
are people who make the choice to live here and sacrifice a lot. I mean, they're paying 50, 60% because to them it's worth it. And so it's going to be an ongoing battle.
Yeah, and I haven't heard anyone say what you said, which is that very, like a nuanced, specific, rent controlled type of housing where it does more to ensure that people who actually need it would be using those units,
Right.
Mostly it's just like, if you build more, then you create more inventory, which lowers the rents, which it may work some places, but I've not seen it work here or in
I haven't seen it
California.
work any place yet. I mean, it's like The only place it worked was when the World Trade Center went down, went up originally. It lowered rents in New York City for commercial for 2 years because it was so much at once. But I don't think we want to build the World Trade Center in Goleta.
Yeah. And also, I wish somebody would be talking about ways to keep locals who grow up here and
Hmm.
allow them to stay here because I think so much, and you see this from the activist class too, who largely came from outside of the area and now are taking up housing here and then talking about how we need more housing. We need to also preserve the kids who went to our local schools, who went to high school here, and who want to be able to live in this community because not everybody can live with their parents forever. Not everybody's parent owns a house. Like some people's parents rented, and I don't think there's enough discussion on the locals, the local people who grew up here, because if you grew up here, you have a understanding of things that if you didn't, you just wouldn't know. I mean, you know where things are at, you know where the impacts are, you know where the traffic, if you're getting off on Glen Annie and Stork every day, and if you've been getting off on it like your whole life because you've been going to DP or something, that's dangerous. But like 4:30, 5 o'clock, depending on the time of the year, and then you're going to put more housing out there. It's like accidents just waiting to happen and it backs up, And so I think I'd love to hear more people talking about not just the high paying, like sort of tech workers, but keeping like the local kids be able to stay here. A lot of my friends, live in Ventura, Oxnard, Lompoc, Santa Maria, or Oregon or Seattle, Washington. They just like go further for Arizona. And it's a tough thing. Let me ask you about the Glen Annie rezone. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a big one. What do you think of that? I mean, is there anything there that you like? 800 to 1,000 units.
Um,
The
not really.
process. What do you think? Yeah.
Actually, if I had my druthers, the city would have annexed it and turned it into a city hall. And we would have had a city hall with a fabulous terrace and built an office building attached. We would have had the parking lot. We would have had a lovely park or golf course. And we could have been the only city with a full bar already in it for when things get testy at meetings. No, I mean it was available for like $5-6 million. It would have been a great investment. The county told us years ago that Goleta wanted to incorporate it or to bring it into the city, and the county said, "Oh no, no! If it becomes part of Goleta, you're going to urbanize it." And they've changed their tune conveniently. There's a few things on the most broad level. I think we need to have a South Coast wide discussion of the urban boundary because Glen Annie is a bite into the urban boundary line. Down in Carpinteria, there's one or two, I forget exactly, places where they've moved into the urban boundary line with it. If we want to start eating up agricultural spaces, we should have a discussion, say, where are we willing to move into those areas? Where are we not? And let's establish that. And that said, and I'm getting to Glen Annie, but once you decide that, you're also going to have to look within your community going, where are we willing to take higher density or taller buildings, such as in Santa Barbara, where they're talking 6 stories at the La Cumbre Plaza, although that's starting below ground. So that's another discussion that's following. Glen Annie itself, uh, the county dumps everything in Western Goleta because that's where the most land is, but they promptly started going, well, if we can't mitigate everything, we can waive it. And that's unfortunately that idea got voted down at this point. But the amount of congestion that's coming from it is going to be horrendous. I think they should have done some traffic studies before they rezone because basically rezoning is a gigantic transfer of wealth. You had a golf course that was worth maybe 5 or 6 million, and now with a lot of homes, it's worth a lot more. There's a few other things, and there's probably not time to get into all, but it's very complicated because there's actually 3 parcels. And what got rezoned was the 95 acres that the golf course owners from Boston actually own. And then there was 2 parcels on either side, 40 acres that were part of the golf course under an illegal agreement. And when they showed their drawings, they just happily included all this as part of their golf course. And they showed improvements like community centers and swimming pools on a 40-acre parcel that was zoned for ag and is still zoned for ag. And so there was a certain degree of deception on the sales point. At this point, they've gotten the rezone. They could actually go ahead and bring forward a project on just that 95 acres. That's the middle part of the course. The other portion, it's sold ownership. I think there was the article last week on the lawsuit that's taking place where there's people stop it. I understand. My understanding was there was another lawsuit that's a sequel one saying you can't daisy chain your rezones. So I don't expect to see any dirt being turned on the golf course anytime soon. One question I would have is, in that it's been rezoned, is it legal to still operate a golf course there? But a lot of people in the community want to see that stay a golf course, but something also has to be profitable. But it's probably way too much to the wrong location. And that back in December, I organized in conjunction with Joan Hartman's office, we had a meeting where neighbors could come and talk about it. Unfortunately, it turned more into sort of a sales pitch for the developers, and a lot of people went away frustrated. But there was a lot of interest. There was about 110 people there, and it's a lovely site. Uh, would have been a great city hall, but it's going to be tied up for a while now. And but there's no, and this includes Kenwood now. There's no simple solution to the traffic congestion at Glen Annie, because Caltrans has a 600-foot right of way along Stork Road going north. In an ideal world, if you want to put Calle Real through Bishop Ranch and tie in, you might alleviate some of the congestion. But as soon as you put Calle Real through, somebody's going to want to do a shopping center on Bishop Ranch. And we have the Good Land Coalition thing about preserving our ag space is up for renewal this year. And I support that and hope to see it move forward.
Oh yeah, I'm gone if they. I better not say that because then they'll build it. But like that Bishop Ranch open space, I mean,
Yeah.
that's so important. Like it's so part of our city. If they ever develop that, I mean, it's just going to be the end. It's just going to be too much.
Well, it's beautiful because we get that. Then you go on down the road, you get to Lake Los Caneros. Have open space there, and so it's the two great open spaces for Goleta and plus Gersh Park.
Yeah. So let me ask you about Kenwood Village. I have not reported on that as much as the Glen Hanny thing and some of the other rezones. What is the problem there? It's too dense, wrong spot, traffic. I know you've had some choice words about the project publicly. What
Who
is the
me?
issue
Who
there?
me? Choice words. Yeah, Kenwood. There's a lot of resistance to it for a variety of reasons. One is that Calle Real is fairly narrow there. There's not a bike lane. There's not, unless you're going to do parking like they do by Blue Skies, where you're parked on the sort of the shoulder of the road. There's probably not going to be enough parking for it.
Yeah.
It's Kyle Richards says it's a dangerous strip of road. I don't like to bike there, and yet they want to put a couple hundred more units coming out onto it. The Mr. Alker had a proposal in for 65, I think it was 63 or 65 units. He probably would have been better off sticking with that. You could actually be building right now with the rezone. Now you're committed to going to 30 units per acre. The the biggest issues are the congestion at Glen Annie Stork and the 101 that you're throwing more people into that. It's incredibly high density. It does not. We've never actually built a high density project in the city of Goleta, which is like 30 to 40 units per acre. But we're talking something similar to John Price's project there at Cortona Point, those very nice white ones as you go down Glenny. Something comparable to that on that Kenwood property, right next to all single family homes, duplexes next door. And so the general feeling of people in the neighborhood was way too much, too high, too tall, and that the congestion is, I think, is probably the biggest congestion. I personally put together a 36-page document that I took up to HCD, who, as far as I can tell, they're fairly tone deaf. And thank you very much. But it showed that using their own guidelines for what was a good selection for affordable housing, because part of Kenwood is 20% inclusionary, it didn't meet in terms of local services unless you think that low-income people are going to shop at 7-Eleven and the liquor store. It wasn't that close to schools. There wasn't really good safe sidewalks to get to places. If you were handicapped, I forget what it is, 9 street crossings between Kenwood and getting up to 101. There's no real bus service. There is one bus that loops through the neighborhood. And it failed on every single point that HCD said was important for this. And they went ahead and said, yeah, it's great. Let's approve this housing element. So to some degree, I think the state is taking this view. We don't really care about quality. We just care about getting the numbers in. I think Kenwood's still too big. James Carriaco helped knock it down. It was proposed at 290. He did knock it down to 190. And like I said, bonus density can go up. But we're still a ways out on that. And then, of course, the city, not to change subjects, but has just recently is changing speed limits by 5 to 10 miles an hour on a lot of arterials. And that is one road that could benefit from it. But there's a lot of other ones that's not necessary. But Kenwood's still going to be a vitrolic thing. I know Ethan Whittle is very opposed to it. Jen Smith, who's running, lives in District 3 too. She was on the Planning Commission voting for it. So there's probably going to be some lively discussion between them about it. My personal view is it's too much unless they come up with a mitigation impact for the freeway. So,
Yeah.
and of course, we had money set aside with SB CAG for a Western Goleta overcrossing that would have gone from Elwood Station Road over to San Rosano. At SB CAG, the city basically lied and said you'd have to tear down 14 houses and we'd have to condemn a bunch of commercial buildings. And so they convinced SB CAG to take that 8.4 million and give it to Old Town Goleta for Project Connect because it was underfunded. And now they rezoned the Elwood Station Road property that Alistair Wynn owns. So you're never going to see a Western Goleta overcrossing, which could have created a much more safe passage for pedestrians, for bicycles in Western Goleta, and for cars. So I'm sorry to see that go. So we're going to have long-term problems at Stort Glen Annie.
So one of the things that people who are running, against you and against Ethan and others, they'll say things like these are anti-housing people, right? They'll portray you and others as being against housing. So can you just kind of like clarify your point? Just take a minute. I don't hear you sounding like somebody who says, we don't want to build for people who need housing. I don't hear you saying that you like want to keep everybody out of Goleta. We're stuck in time. I don't hear that from you. So can you sort of clarify, I mean, you want housing. You just want housing that is affordable for the people who need it. And what do you say to people who say, oh, Rich just doesn't want out. He's a NIMBY or don't want housing anywhere near him. How do you how
Well,
do you how do you respond to that? Yeah.
I haven't actually heard that from anybody, though it may be being said someplace and stuff. And I would like to say, you know, I don't think it's that much adversarial between people running for office generally as just like we have different visions or we have different things. On the housing issue, my biggest point is it does us no good to build housing if once it's finished, it's unaffordable. Hollister Village by Smart and Final. If you don't have a lease, a 3 bedroom right now is $6,913 a month. You
Wow.
need to make 3 times that to apply, and they don't take co-signers. And when that was first going in, there was talk about how oh, we need workforce housing. And to her credit, Paula Perotte voted against that project. My opponent voted against that. So the answer is not just more. And when people hear the state saying we want to build affordable housing, they think that actually means it's more economically affordable for people who grew up here or for police, fire, nurses, and teachers. And that's not necessarily the case. Some of them are, but historically we've had, say, 20% inclusionary policy. You build 100 units, 20% inclusionary. The developer could buy out of half of that. And so if you looked at the number of people it took to maintain the other ones you built, you were always forever going backwards. So I think that when it comes to housing, I don't like what the housing element has done right now, packing everybody right around one end. On the upside, I think if you can keep your density up along the Hollister corridor, we could then start running bus service that say one every 15 minutes, which meets our goals of alternative transportation. But in my neighborhood over here by DP, I think it's an hour between buses, and then you go on this long circuitous route to get any place. One of our planning commissioners said you can't commute anywhere from north of the freeway.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is a matter of urban planning, looking at areas where we may want to go taller. We have some restrictions. We've got an airport smack dab in the middle of the city, which limits where we can build. Um, it limits height on a number of properties. So yeah, if you say you're just a NIMBY, I would say no. I will say this: I do think people who who saved their money and bought a single family home, to some degree, just suddenly saying, now we've rezoned your whole neighborhood to dual density through ADUs is not necessarily fair to those people. Five of your neighbors decide to build an ADU, they don't have to add any extra parking, and you didn't. They're bringing in, 3,000, 5,000 a month in rent, and you're not. Somehow that seems like a poor plan. Maybe we just need to zone for smaller units. That we don't need everybody doesn't need a 3,000 square foot house. But it's a matter of making sure we spread it out across the community. There's some parcels out in outer end of Hollister that didn't want to participate in the housing element that I think long term could be placed, and that would be on the Hollister traffic corridor. So, but I will say we are not going to build enough housing for anybody who wants to live here, and the telecommuting has compounded that. I was speaking to a realtor who was selling condos for $1,000,001. I said, "Who's buying this?" He says, "They're people from San Francisco coming down from the tech. They can work from here," and so as long as you can telecommute, people with more money are going to want to work here and push stuff up. Um, and part of it's perception. I bought my house back around 2000. I was in my 40s before I did, and it sounds ridiculously cheap. It was like 359, and it's probably worth a mill two, mill three day. That's actually a 6% growth rate. If I got 6% on the stock market, nobody's, people are going like, "Well, geez, it should be seven." That part of it is we have these cycles where prices go way up that to people who want to get in, I'm saying do their best to save some money now. My place went up to whatever 800 or so in 2008. It dropped down to probably 550. So those people who are able to set some money aside and get ready to pounce when interest rates drop. So partially it's long-term planning. You're not going to be able to necessarily buy a house as soon as you're 25. Businesses have to do more to help those people they are bringing in to get into the market. And like I said, I think if we're going to force higher density, we need to make the rules on bonus density um, uh, somehow to make it more economically affordable. So,
So, Rich, let's talk a little bit about you and your background, your history. People when they vote, right? A lot of them just kind of vote on who they like, who seems like an interesting person, or who knocks on their door, and if they're kind of in step with their values, that might win them over. A lot of people vote at the last minute, like, "Oh, Goleta, who are the candidates?" kind of thing. Who is Rich Foster? Can you talk a little bit about how long you've lived here and the types of things that you've been doing that have, created a platform and a reason for you to run?
yeah, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, basically, and then I came to the West Coast for the first time from Japan because I was going around the world with my brother when I was 20, visiting a lot of places. Um, I ended up out in Santa Barbara in 74. My brother and I set up a bookstore at Magnolia Shopping Center for my parents. And I went back to school after a while, and he ran for a year. The folks came out there. Eventually, they were all here, and now they've all left. It's just me left in the area. I've been a contractor for about 40 years. Before that, I had majored in psychology, worked in counseling programs where you deal with people. Spent a couple of years crewing yachts, which is a great opportunity to learn how to get along with people and negotiate. Back right after I moved out to Goleta, which would have been 2000, they were closing El Rancho School or trying to close El Rancho School. We had a long, bitter fight about closing that. Got used to speaking to the Goleta school board at the time. They went ahead and closed the school. Unfortunately, it was one of their best for socially, economically disadvantaged. But the Goleta school is overall really good, but was doing that. And then I had a long, serious fight with the school district over at Dos Pueblos High School when they were building their auditorium and redoing their bleachers and stuff because they had the negative declaration of impact statements. And it was about a 40-page document that they promptly and systematically violated every agreement they had ever promised the community, whether about starting times, noise levels, dust control. The long and short, they ended up with a lovely project, but I spent a lot of time going down to the city council, down to the school board saying, wait, you said you weren't going to have anything on Thursday nights, and now you have games going until 10 o'clock, that kind of thing. A lot of practice public speaking there. And about the same time, started going to city council meetings. We had the discussions about Bishop Ranch when Mr. Custon was trying to get it rezoned. again, and that had very wide participation. And over the last, 12, 13, 14 years at least, there's consistently been issues I've gone down to address that, followed the politics in the city. I think early on we had two councils. The first, the one that would be probably labeled no slow growth, and the second one that was more pro growth. They were a group of people who had a vision of what they wanted to see done, and their view was pretty much tell staff, this is what we want, make it happen. I think to some degree, and people can argue with me on this, but we fall into a thing where the council looks more at, you're the specialist, tell us what we should do. And so staff to some degree sets the agenda rather than here's what we want you to deliver. And
Mhm.
that I think is not as healthy in terms of getting argumentative points. The So like I said earlier, I got to running this time around because I'm concerned about money long term. I don't think recently they just started voted to have a joint powers agreement, which is a way the city can issue bonds and borrow money
Mhm.
largely without a lot of local pushback. And that's kind of a way of pushing the debts for maintaining what we didn't maintain today onto the next generation. And so we wanted to become a city to take care of our roads. Um, that's got me out there. The more I drove around the roads, the more I wanted to do something about it. And the more I heard about capital improvement projects that we have, I think, 16 capital improvement projects just on hold completely. And sooner or later, you got to deliver on that or give the money back. The argument is we start giving money back, we'll never get another grant. Well, to the degree at which we're so far in the hole on grants right now, that may not be the worst thing. Today we're opening, celebrating the starting of the Goleta train station, a $32 million thing. I think originally it was 10 million in grants and 2 million from the city, and it morphed into this thing where you've got showers and you've got this, and we average 100 riders a day. It's a little bit the theory, if you build it, they will come, but Amtrak controls whether they come or not. And they're starting a trial period for 4.4 million to increase train service one each way each day. And that's like we're paying $44 per passenger to get 50 riders off the road. Um, I think we would have been better off taking that money and putting, say, into the fire station 10, where we've rezoned for all these new projects. Plus, we've done a lot of growth over the years. Fire Station 10 has been languishing for probably close to 20 years because um, when the Hideaway was built, they wrote a check for $1.5 million towards the train station, and now it's 2024, and they're still just talking about getting going on it. So I think priority wise, we can do better things, and that's where I'm at. So. I will say, I think everybody that's on council right now, I mean, disagree with them on things, but they all do love Goleta. I mean, it's people don't run for office because they are trying to enrich themselves or get a platform, generally speaking, maybe sometimes. But we do definitely have differences, opinions on what's going to be best long term.
Yeah, well, we're talking about Goleta, but well, Goleta is the good land. I love Goleta. People who aren't from here and they want to compare Santa Barbara to Goleta, it's like Goleta's great. We have great schools and we have great places to shop and we have a sense of community. Even though we disagree on some of these things that come up, but we still have a lot of people who care passionately. And if you got to go to Camino Real Marketplace, like that place is like, so busy. And you go out to Fairview, it's busy, and Old Town Goleta is busy. It's just there's so many great things about Goleta, and we do have our Elwood and our Lake Los Caneros. We have their great
Yeah.
public areas where you can do a lot of stuff, and we have a great beach. I mean. Wish it had more park space and all that, and it wasn't always under construction. I know that's county, but still
Yeah.
Goleta-ish. So Rich, let me just sort of as we wrap up here, we got a few more minutes. Just kind of talk to me. If you're a Goleta voter, right? You're hearing all this messaging. You've got three races. You got a mayor's race, two council district races. You might be on next door. You might be somebody who who's, just kind of like, I don't care too much about the partisan stuff. I just want the right people in office. Why should somebody vote for you? Make a change over Paula Perotte, who's a very nice person. She's been around a long time. It's hard for anyone to like not like Paula, like she's a good person. Why should they make a change? Why should they go with Rich?
A while back, I was down along Cathedral Oaks talking to Paula about some green waste, and at the time we had a chuckle that anybody driving by is probably going like, "Isn't that Rich and Paula both standing there? What's that all about?" Uh, so, you know, um, that I'm losing track which way I'm going here.
Why should anyone
You
vote
know,
for Rich Foster over
yeah, no,
Perotte?
that the big thing is money. I think that there's you can say, wouldn't it be nice if we had this? Wouldn't it be nice if we had that? Wouldn't it be nice that? But long term for me and for my kids' future, we need to be better disciplined about it. The crib wall in Outer Goleta, which is 20 million, 30 million, depends who you ask. FEMA refused to give us any money because they called it a failure to maintain it, and that it was not a matter of just the storms, it was neglect. And so that's one of the strongest things I feel is that we need to get back to maintaining our infrastructure. That if each year your roads are a little worse, at one of the meetings, Stuart Kasdan suggested we just lower our standard for roads, and that's not the answer. We need to put the money into where we need to do it, and if that means giving up something else, then that's what we need to do at this time. That's what would be my message. I'm aiming for the middle of the road. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of Republican groups. The Democrats are, it's kind of closed because they're locked in on the incumbents. And I've told everybody I've talked to, I said, look, you get on the outer edges of the spectrum. I got problems with both sides. Fortunately, most of the social agenda items aren't a matter of city politics. City politics are the basics of, employees meeting what the citizens want in the community and taking care of our infrastructure. And so that's my message, is that vote for me because I'm looking at infrastructure, and vote for candidates who are talking about that. I mean, I don't want to start pitching for people, but look for people who to have the same message that this is what we want to do.
And well, the thing you love about Goleta is, we have these district elections now. We see it in Santa Barbara too, is it's a different like sort of angle in Goleta, but people who care, who live in the community, who interact with it, who aren't necessarily endorsed by all the powerful groups in town can run, and they can have
Yeah.
a platform and they can be viable. You're running that large contest, but you are a Goleta guy, right? You live Goleta. This is your life. You've raised kids here going to public schools. And it's good to see someone like you be able to run and have a platform, and the voters will decide who it is, I like Paula too, she's a
Yeah.
she's a good person. So,
No, we've always
yeah.
gotten along very well. So
And then you have an event coming up. I know you wanted to talk about that.
yeah, I was organizing an event as a private citizen, although people look at it, suspect, I guess, and think you're a candidate, on September 21st, which is a week from this Saturday, from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at the Goleta Community Center. We're having an open and mic event. All the candidates have been invited, and the idea is not to give speeches. It's not to have people write down questions where they can be vetted before they get asked. It would be go up to the microphone, ask your question. If you have comments as a citizen, email them in. It's to move the meeting along to get as many questions answered by candidates. Not everybody says they're going to go, but I still have hopes that everybody eventually will decide they want to go. It's an opportunity for the public to just come down and say, I want to know why we're not doing blah, blah, blah. And the candidate can say this, or they could say, why should I vote for you? And uh, but we don't want people to come down and think they're going to start lecturing about something. Write it down, send it in. I hope to have a great turnout for it, and that because there's a limited number of forums. Santa Barbara League of Voters is going to have theirs in October 10th, I think. I don't know of any other forums right now, and this would be a forum that would be unvetted questions, and with the only caveat being abuse, insults, and whatever will not be tolerated by the moderator. Um, that's the pitch for that.
Okay. Well, great, Rich. I really appreciate your time, and I respect everything you do in the community and all your activism. And we wish everyone would be informed on all these issues and care enough as you do. So good luck out there, and I'll see you around. So thanks a lot, Rich, for your time.
Great talking, Josh.
All
Thanks.
right, take care.